Okay, welcome everyone. So in this video, I want to continue working with the Storms data frame, which is in the dplyr package. And so if you're just opening up, if you're just starting to work with this data, just keep in mind, first you're going to want to run this dplyr command. So there is a link in the description of this video to this Colab notebook if you want to follow along with the code that I'm running. And the very first thing that you're going to want to do is run the dplyr, the library dplyr command to load this package. And now you're ready to go. And question two is saying, okay, we want to get to know this storms data set. In particular, we want to know how many observations are in the data set, how many variables are in the data set, which of the variables are quantitative, which are categorical, and which of the categorical variables have a ranking, which do not. And I want to do this without running the view command. I want to do this without looking at the entirety of the data set. So here are some suggested functions that might be good to run in R to get a sense of what's in our data. Earlier, I ran a head command in the previous video, and probably we might be able to answer almost all of those questions, a lot of those questions, just looking at the first 6 rows of the data frame. In the previous video, we also ran a help command and opened up the help documentation for storms. I'll run it again. And looking through the help documentation, you might also be able to answer nearly all of those questions. So there are lots of different ways that you might be able to answer those questions. So I think if you have some time and you wanted to scroll through the help documentation, I think that might actually give you a way of answering a lot of those questions listed in question 2. But let's take a look at what some of these different commands do. And a nice thing to point out here is that another nice way to use comments, we've talked about comments, is that you can comment out different commands. So here I've got a whole bunch of commands in this code cell. All of them are commented out except for the very first one. So if I run this code cell, notice that all of these commands below the summary command begin with the hashtag or the pound symbol. So none of these commands are going to be executed, just the summary command will be. And so when I run the summary command, I'm getting a numerical summary of all of the different variables in the data frame. And so in total, there are 13 variables in this data frame. And based on how the data is being stored, what the structure of the variable is, I'm getting a different summary. So the name, that's the name of the storm, such as Amy. This is being stored as a character, so I'm really not getting any useful summary of that variable. Year is a numeric variable. It's telling me the minimum value, the maximum value, the median, the mean, the first quantile, the third quantile, etc. So for numeric variables, I'm getting a numeric summary. For characters, I'm really not getting much of a useful summary. For the status variable, I'm actually getting counts. It's telling me how many observations in my data set were tropical storms. There were 6,830 tropical storms. There were 4,803 hurricanes, and so on. So for status is a categorical variable, and it's telling me the counts, the frequency, how many observations are there for each of the classes of the status variable. And all of the other remaining variables are numeric, so it's telling me numeric summaries for those. And if you're looking at this output, you might see a couple of other things. For the hurricane diameter variable, I'm getting this numeric summary about the minimum value, the median, etc. And it's also telling me that there are 9,512 NAs. Tropical storm force diameter is also telling me that there are 9,512 NAs. So there are the same number of NAs over here. And for the category of storm, okay, and so a category only corresponds to hurricanes. So only hurricanes get categorized as category 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So first of all, the category of a storm, although it's categorized with a number, this is actually a categorical variable, right? Because it's just that the name of the category happens to be a number, but we could have just called it category A, category B, C, D, and E. These are actually categorical variables. We're placing the storms into different categories, into different groupings. So there's something wrong with the way that category is being stored initially. That's one problem. And another thing is that notice there are a lot of observations whose category value is being stored as an NA value. So we'll talk about what that means momentarily. So the summary tells us a whole bunch of information about all of the variables in the data set. It's very detailed. Let's compare that to what we get. We've seen what happens when we run the head command. It prints out the first 6 rows of the data frame. When we run a tail command, we'll get something very similar. Instead of the first 6 rows, this is going to tell me the last 6 rows of the data, which are observations corresponding to the last storms that occurred in 2022, which is a storm, Tropical Storm Nicole. We can take a look at the output that we get from the glimpse command. And so this is a less detailed than the summary. And so this is a really nice way of figuring out the data type of each of these variables. So you can see it's telling me I have 19,537 rows. That's exactly how many observations are in the data set. It's telling me I have 13 columns. That's exactly how many variables I have in the data set. It's telling me what the name of each of these 13 variables are. And over here, it's telling me the data type of each of those 13 variables. So name is being stored as a character. Year is being stored as a decimal, as double. Month is being stored as a decimal, double. Day is being stored as an integer, and so on. And so over here, you should be familiar with these different data types. We've discussed them earlier. Status is being stored as FCT. That's a new data type that we actually haven't discussed yet. This is what's called a factor, and we'll talk about that momentarily. This is a way that we store categorical data. So this is a new data type that we'll talk about shortly. So that's nice. So the glimpse function tells us an overview of the data. And lastly, there is a structure command, which tells us similar information about the data. It looks pretty similar to the glimpse command. The glimpse command is from the dplyr package. This structure command is from base R. This is telling us how the data is being stored. Again, it's telling us how many rows are in the data, so I can see how many observations there are, 19,537. It's telling us how many columns there are, how many variables, and then it's telling us the data type of each of those. And then for this one status variable, which is being stored as a factor, it's telling us how many levels there are. And so by level, that means how many different categories of the status variable there are. So in other words, it can be a tropical storm, it can be a tropical depression, it can be a hurricane. So these are all of the different types of status that a storm can have. So based on all of these different various outputs, you should be able to answer these different questions over here in question 2. I will kind of take us over, excuse me, to the solution that I've typed up over here. Yeah, I'll post these solutions in Canvas, but you can kind of check the answers over here that out of the 13 variables, 10 of them are quantitative and 3 of them are categorical. And so the 3 categorical variables in the data set would be the name, the storm name, the status of the storm, and there are 9 classes for the status. And again, these would be things like tropical depression, hurricane, and so on. And then there's also the category of the storm, and this only applies to hurricanes. So only hurricanes have a category. Tropical depressions don't have a category. And so any storm in the data set which is not a hurricane, its category is classified with an NA, meaning not applicable. It also means like this is a missing value. So it means that any storm which is not a hurricane does not have a category. So it just has a missing value. It is empty. It did not have any value filled in for its category. And there were some other variables that had missing values. And that's what is being asked in question 3 in this module is what variables have missing values. And that's what these NAs are signifying. So when we looked at the summary, and what's nice about these comments is now I can turn different commands on and off in this code cell. So if I want to turn the structure command off and go back and look at the summary output, I can do that by turning this comment back on and deleting the hashtag that was below summary and then running this code cell. I can see that tropical storm force diameter had some NAs. Hurricane force diameter had some NAs. Category had some NAs. All of the other variables, they did not have any NAs. And again, we talked about why category has NAs, because only hurricanes are given category 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So all of the observations that were not hurricanes, if they were a tropical depression, subtropical storm, whatever, they did not have a category. So looking at Amy, for example, it was a tropical depression. The category was left as an NA. Notice it also has a tropical force diameter and hurricane force diameter values of NA. This storm occurred in 1975. If we look at the help documentation for storms, we can see down here that these storm diameters, these were only recorded starting in 2004. So we didn't have the technology necessarily to start recording this data until 2004. So for any storms in our data set that were observed and recorded prior to 2004, we did not have this information. So in place of the force diameter for a hurricane or tropical storm, these were left as NAs. But after 2004, so for example, in 2022, these were recorded, and these are no longer missing values for those observations. And so in the solutions that I post up in Canvas, I kind of explain this. So you can kind of write up your own solutions, and you should kind of check that with the solutions posted in Canvas for those working on these questions. Okay, so I will stop here in this video and pick up talking about checking the data types for a data frame in the next video. Thanks, everyone.